to Ballot Battleground, Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at News 4 Reno and Fox 11. I'm passionate about making politics in our critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. Candidate filing is underway. Mock election demonstrations are happening. There's going to be slightly different technology when you go to vote in person this year. The 2026 midterms are here, and we're getting into all of it on Ballot Battleground Nevada this week with the man who is the chief of Nevada's election system, a previous guest on this show, Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar. But of course, we can't talk about Nevada elections without talking about the federal government trying to intervene in elections across the state. We have President Donald Trump talking about nationalizing our election system. And of course, the SAVE Act is making its way through Congress right now after passing in the U.S. House earlier this month. How does Secretary of State Aguilar feel about these reforms as we head into such a critical election year? Will they actually make Nevada's elections more secure, or is it a solution in search of a problem? We get into all of it, plus some fun topics at the end about the future of elections. Could you just vote by having your face scanned? Could you potentially one day vote online? An interesting conversation with our Secretary of State, Cisco Aguilar. Let's get into it. All right, he's a friend of the pod, but we're still going to ask him some tough questions. The Secretary of State of Nevada, Cisco Aguilar. Cisco, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben, for having me. Excited for the questions.
Yeah, so let's see. You were down in Carson. We're recording this on Friday, but so yesterday you guys had the big mock election demonstration. All the clerks and registrars across the Silver State. How did it go? Are we ready for 2026?
It went really, really well. It was really exciting to see the technology come together, to see the voter experience improve, but also to see the clerks so committed to the effort. You know, we couldn't do this work without them, and the effort yesterday was in conjunction with the county clerks across the state, and the fact that they're so committed, and I wish every voter could see that commitment, that they are truly trying to do a job, that they have to nearly perform perfect every time. And that's not easy to do, but they continue to do it, and I was super proud to see it all come together.
Yeah. The big change for voters is going to be these new voting machines.
Yes.
We talked about this on the podcast with Washoe County's registrar towards the end of last year, but for people who might not know, what's going to be changing when they walk up to the polls in 2026?
So it's ballot marking devices. You know, we listened to voters across the state. We heard their concerns. We heard where they wanted to participate in the process. And so we now have ballot marking devices. We tested 2 counties in the 24 election. Voters really, really were accepting of it. They were excited to see it. So now when you walk into a polling location, you verify who you are as a voter, you get your card, you go to the machine, you stick that card in the machine, you do all your votes, and then once you're done, there will be a printer there that will actually print out the ballot for you to verify that every vote is correct. And once you have that paper and you deem it correct, you actually put it in the tabulator yourself. And so having that extra opportunity to touch it, see it, feel it, and then actually go into the process of tabulating is really, really cool. Those store receipt boxes on the side of the machine are now gone.
Yeah, that's what people are, used to. For people who may not remember last time they voted in person, you get you can see the little receipt, but you don't get to hold it with your own hands. But whereas this, it's going to print out your ballot. It's essentially going to be the exact same as the mail ballot that you receive.
Yes, it's similar to it. And you bring up a great point. With that technology now, we could potentially start accepting mail ballots. The voter could take their mail ballot and actually put it into the tabulator themselves.
In person at a polling place.
Yes,
then.
But that takes a little bit of, re-engineering the check-in process because we'd have to verify who that voter is, validate them as a voter, and then allow them to put their mail. But, that's phase 2. And when I mentioned that to the clerks, their eyes just got really big because, look, it's my job to push and push and push and figure out where we can build efficiencies. How do we use technology to better secure our elections? It's always finding better ways to improve the process. And yesterday was a culmination of a lot of improvements that have come across the last couple of years.
Some people have called for true paper ballots, I think, where the voter is still individually filling in the bubble, even when you're voting in person. So this is not quite that, but it is kind of a step in that direction where they get to hold it still, verify with their eyes, and put it in the scanner. That's pretty cool.
That is correct. And it also, too, allows clean bubbles, so we know every vote's going to get counted. And again, it's just increasing the experience of the voter.
Okay. And obviously the 2026 campaign season underway. already, as we speak, a candidate filing will have begun by the time you're listening to this episode on Friday. It runs through what? The following Friday, March 13th?
So March 2nd through March 13th. So it's, Monday to a Friday, almost a 2-week period.
Okay, very good. Probably hundreds of candidates across the Silver State. I don't know. Maybe do we get past 1,000 candidates in all the smaller races?
Maybe, potentially.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Especially including judges. Don't forget,
right,
judges already had their filing period. They're already running. Now it's time to get non-judicial races out there.
Okay, it's all beginning. And let's dive into kind of the federal angle, I guess, of all this, which is that as the state and the county clerks and registrars gear up to run the election pretty similarly to we have in years past, what's kind of hanging over the election conversation, if you will. We'll start with President Trump openly talking about the federal government taking over elections. In his way of speaking, it's difficult to tell if he's talking about every state or jurisdiction. Sometimes he names certain cities or states in particular. You've been pretty clear about this conversation. What do you think of Trump talking about nationalizing our elections?
I think it's a bunch of talk, right? If you actually read the Constitution, it's very clear about states have the responsibility to run elections. The language in the Constitution is pretty convoluted in certain sections, but when it comes to this statement, it's very, very clear that states have the responsibility to run elections. The federal government can have input, but that has to go through Congress. And also, too, if the president wants to change the way we run our elections, he can lobby the legislature and the governor to introduce that legislation during a legislative session and make those policy changes. But until then, we're going to follow Nevada law, and we're going to do what's in the best interest of Nevadans as a whole.
One piece of legislation that they're working on, the Republicans, that is the SAVE Act, which would bring voter ID different, I guess similar in some senses, but different really than the Nevada ballot measure to establish voter ID in the Silver State. I just want to be very clear with our audience. Could you, as obviously the expert in this field, explain the differences between how the SAVE Act would require voter ID and the Nevada ballot measure, question 7, which will be on the ballot in 2026?
I think in the 24 election, we saw 73% of Nevadans vote in support of the ballot ID initiative in Nevada. Ballot ID, I think, is a little bit of a red herring in the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is much more dangerous when it comes to actually registering voters and preventing people access to the polls. And I think those are the issues we have to talk about the SAVE Act. Disproportionately it'll impact women who've been married, whose documents from birth are different name than what they have now, and having to prove identity and prove citizenship would be much more difficult for certain populations. You look at tribal communities, unfortunately, a lot of our tribal members don't have birth certificates. They're still U.S. citizens, and they have a fundamental right to vote. So we have to look at the unintended consequences of that legislation. The other thing is even stepping back even more. You have a bunch of policymakers trying to make policy that don't truly understand the way our election system works. They don't understand the division of duties. They don't understand the security processes that go into running an election. But here they are in D.C., disconnected from local communities, trying to pass policy that actually, when trying to be implemented, is impossible. You talk about bureaucracy. They are creating a massive amount of bureaucracy, and the cost to implement that bureaucracy is significant. Look, Nevada runs a tight and lean budget. We have needs in this state. We have needs for public education, for healthcare, for infrastructure. And you place a huge burden, administrative burden, on getting people registered to vote by having to prove in person their identity and citizenship. That's going to create a bureaucracy that we've never seen in this state. And unfortunately, the clerks deserve the resources to run strong elections, and they haven't even started at that basic level. If they truly cared about our elections, they'd be investing and finding out and working with local elections officials about how we can actually increase the efficiency of our elections and what is needed to increase the security. But they haven't had those conversations. And I think it's important to understand that 14 of the 17 clerks across the state are Republican. 2 are appointed by their county commissions, Washoe and Clark. 1 is a Democrat, and 1's a nonpartisan. And so when you really truly look at the way we run our elections, it is truly a secure environment and a secure approach.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I just want to explain for our audience. Nevada's question 7 would require, you have that photo ID, obviously when you register to vote, but also when you go to vote in person, and then you put in, right, it's the last 4 of your social or some identifying information on your mail ballot if you're doing it that way. And the SAVE Act, again, correct me if I'm wrong, goes a step further to where you need a passport or your original birth certificate when you register to vote.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. And, unfortunately, not every American has the I should say the benefit of having a passport, right? There's a select few of Americans who have the option to have a passport or have applied for a passport. One, it's time consuming. It takes money and resources. And there are certain groups of populations of Americans who have a higher passport than others. And we want to make sure that when we are looking at this, yes, Nevada has secure elections. We have an ID and verification process in our voter registration, which provides the security of our system. And so to put these additional burdens are just, again, it's extraordinary, it's not normal, and it's not necessary.
From the married women perspective as well, more Democrats more likely to be married women than Republicans, right? And so who knows, I guess, how the ultimate partisan breakdown of this, but are you analyzing it from that lens? It probably doesn't even...
Yeah, but again, it's, this still has to pass through the Senate. The Senate is holding strong on this issue. They understand the implications of it, especially Republican women senators understand the burden it would place on women voters. And so the fact that the Republican senators are holding strong on this issue and truly trying to educate people about the unintended consequences is important. What we can do is focus on what we have control over in Nevada. That is increasing the security of our system, verifying and holding people accountable who decide to break the law. Look, if you are not qualified to be a registered voter in Nevada and you attempt to register to vote, that's a felony. And we need to hold those bad actors accountable for that effort because it makes the rest of us look bad.
It's clear you're opposed to the SAVE Act as it stands.
Absolutely.
Are you going to take a position on Nevada Question 7, the voter ID ballot measure?
Well, I think, look, it's my job as Secretary of State to do what's in the best interest of Nevada as a whole. And if Nevadans say, hey, this is what we demand, and I think that's what they're demanding by 73% of the vote, I think I've recently heard that polling's at 80% for that effort, and it's my job. The challenge we're going to have is when you look at it, and it does pass in 26, it's going to be handed off to the legislature in 27. The legislature will do what the legislature does, and then the Secretary of State's office will receive that legislation in July. We're going to have our first presidential primary election in February of 28. That puts pressure on the Secretary of State's office to implement this process and to update our systems. That means the Secretary of State's office will have 5 months to do this. And we have to do it in a way that it works, it does what we want it to do, but also, too, there's going to have to be a lot of voter education about this process. I've asked for data now from the team to tell me how many registered voters in our current voter rolls do not have a driver's license number, so that we can then start notifying voters that, hey, we need you to consider getting an ID on file with your county clerk so that when it does come into place. But also, too, the other side of it is on the mail ballots. Our mail ballots are secure. But if you have a second identifier on that mail ballot, it may help with the signature cure issue. Because if you can go to a second identifier, if you don't have a signature match, you can go to a second identifier, which then takes the ballot out of the signature cure process.
Talking about the hurdles of, getting
Again, let me
ID.
just say this.
Sure.
You asked me for a position, and I gave you a political answer and never answered your question. I would say it's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And so for that reason, I consider it something we don't need. But if Nevadans demand it, it's my job as an elected official is to govern and to implement.
Okay. Appreciate you circling back to that. Yeah, thank you. Give me a straight answer. Okay, and as we kind of wrap up this conversation, the discussion about the logistical hurdles of getting a passport or whatever, or even an ID for people who don't have that. Do you see it, I guess, as it pertains to the SAVE Act as kind of like a poll tax is something that we do hear about where, it costs money to go and get a passport. Does that function as a poll tax in your eyes?
It does, because also, too, it's a hindrance for somebody who's living in a rural community, right? They're going to have to travel. If you look at Nye County, you have Pahrump and you have Tonopah. Tonopah is the county seat. You also have Duckwater. If you're going to have to drive 3 hours to that county seat to verify who you are as a voter, that's an impediment on your ability to focus on your constitutional right to vote and to have a voice. And I think it's our job to make sure we're hearing from as many Nevadans as possible. And if you're going to take away an opportunity for somebody to do that, it's detrimental.
Okay. Very good. Voter ID discussion. It's a good one. Thank you for all the information. Okay. Talking about cleaning up the voter rolls, there was a huge number of people that were kicked off Nevada's voter rolls to start the year, right?
Yes.
Because you guys kind of compiled all the data over 2025. That was the off year in our election system. And so every county clerk and registrar across the state is going through and cleaning rolls. For people who might not know, just explain, why is that required? Why is it important? And how do we determine who gets kicked off, who stays on?
Yeah, it's prescribed by both state law and federal law. So we have to follow the law in that process. One thing we did is made a huge investment in the technology of our systems. We implemented VREMS, the voter registration election management system. The voter registration piece of that system was to help us better do the voter maintenance that we need to do. We only want active voters on the rolls. We want to make sure, though, that we are not kicking off anybody who's qualified and should be on the rolls. There was an instance prior to the last election of somebody who lived in a rural community, rural county. They had been a registered voter for decades. They unfortunately got sick and had to get medical treatment in California. They changed their address to make sure they could get their ballot while they were getting medical care. Well, the change of address notification is a public record, and a third-party group got a hold of that and tried to challenge that voter registration of that individual. They could have potentially removed that voter, who is still a resident of the county he's been a resident for decades, from participating in our elections and from getting a mail ballot. So there are rules in place to make sure that we are not disqualifying an eligible voter. But at the same time, we need to take inactive voters off. We need to take voters off who have moved. We do participate in the ERIC system, which helps us do that voter maintenance in a very strong way. Recently, Washoe County received voter challenges for about 800 voters. I think it's like 786 or 790 voters. Probably 90% of those 800 were already actively in the maintenance process and were receiving notification. There was about 90 that were not. Majority of that 90 were California, may have moved to California. California is not a member of the ERIC system, which is a detriment to all of us. And, Nevada and California have constant migration. And so we are in conversation with the Secretary of State's office in California to say, hey, how do we get better information and better data to make sure that our voter rolls are even cleaner? This conversation has been tried with California, and it's always been met with resistance. But now we've actually moved into a place where we are having strong conversation about making sure we're doing that. Voter maintenance is critical because we want to it's also about the safety and security of the mail ballot. We want to make sure the intended voter is getting that mail ballot. And also, too, we're not sending mail ballots to a voter that's inactive or no longer in the state. So, yes, we want to make sure, but at the same time, it's a balance of, hey, we cannot remove somebody who's totally eligible to be on the voter rolls and does have a fundamental right to vote. And the standards exist about how that works. And so we're continuing to use our technology to make sure we're doing it. And we want to make sure that we're doing it in the best interest of all Nevadans.
Yeah, and we'll clarify for our audience, there's a difference between, inactive and removed from the rolls
Correct.
altogether. So
it's a staggered process, right? It goes from active to inactive and then being removed after certain requirements are met by law.
As of the start of 2026, more than 138,000 Nevada voters were made inactive, and 177,000 voter registrations were canceled. If you're inactive, you can still vote without needing to re-register, right?
That is correct. And what we also too want to express and get out there is that this process is a two-way street, right? We need voters to actively engage in the process. We need voters to go into their portal, make sure that their addresses are correct, all their information is updated. We're also asking voters to give us their mobile number so that we can communicate with them in real time and make them aware. Again, this all goes to the transparency of the process. The Secretary of State's office has really been focused on modernization, innovation, and transparency, because that's our responsibility. Transparency builds trust with the voter and allows us to really communicate in a direct way. And I think to understand is when we do have mobile numbers for voters, we are able to communicate in an official capacity, and we're able to tell them things they need to know about the process. In 24, we texted every voter who had a signature issue that we had a mobile number for. 58% of those voters cured their ballot. That's huge, because we want to make sure every ballot we receive gets counted because the voter made an effort to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you're running for re-election in 2026.
Yes, sir.
We've been talking mostly policy, but a little bit of politics here at the end. Obviously, if you're running for re-election, you think you deserve another term in that role. How come?
Well, I think we've made a really hard effort to keep our head down and do what we need to do to better serve Nevadans. Government should work for Nevada. And if government is not working for Nevadans, then you can't build that trust and you can't build that relationship with the people that you serve. We've been focused on the business filing system. We fixed over 1,000 bugs in the Silver Flume system so that it actually is functioning. When I took over, it was failing. On a daily basis, there was about a 13 to 14% failure rate on transactions per day. That's business we're losing to Montana, Wyoming, and other states around the country. We've focused on that. That failure rate now is down to 0.1 or 0.2%. So that's revenue we're collecting. We're seeing revenue numbers go up from year over year, month to month. And that's because people are able to do business with us. The whole time was about an hour. We are now down to about 4 to 5 minutes. And some days there's no calls. The other day I was in the office and I tend to roam around a lot. And I'm in the office talking to the customer service folks. And I walked up there and it was dead silent. And I went, oh, is the system down?
It's broken. Yeah.
And I was like, what's up? And they just looked at me like, oh, yeah, we had no calls. And I was like, wait, what? So they're able to have conversations about how to better serve Nevadans during those low times or to do things. Also to the backlog. The paper backlog we have is gone. We used to have cabinets and cabinets of paperwork that needed to be processed. And now it's gone. And so we went through every business process to see where we could build efficiencies and reduce costs, and we did it. And it was about a review of about 600 processes. The new system will go live this summer. We went live with phase 1, the UCC system, which is really helpful to us in generating revenue from outside. So that's a very nerdy, long response to what we're doing. And why do I deserve it? Because I care about this office. The Secretary of State's office is really a technology company, and we're only good as the technology that we have and the services we provide. So it's really been a focus on mine to really modernize the office to make it easier for Nevadans. And there's a lot more work to do. I'm excited about the work, and Nevada deserves somebody who's going to work hard for them every single day.
Top priority if you're reelected?
Continue to focus on the election system, making sure that we're continuing. Cybersecurity is a big priority. We worked on that prior to the 24 election, and with the reduction in support from the federal government on that level, Nevada's in a pretty strong state. When I talk to other Secretary of States around the country that depended on the federal government for this type of support, and it's now gone, they're struggling. They're having to figure out a way to compensate for that loss. And Nevada, I can stand proud and say we did this not just as the Secretary of State's office, but in conjunction with the legislature and the governor's office.
Okay. As we wrap up here, a couple quick lightning round questions.
Sure.
Should Election Day be a holiday?
No, because I think Nevada is a 24/7 economy. And the people you're going to benefit are the people that are already participating in the process. You and I would be fine because we're salaried employees, but there's a lot of employees, workers across the state who get paid based on the time that they commit. Think about a cocktail waitress. Think about an Uber driver. We make it a holiday. They still have to work. And if they don't work, they're not earning the money they need to support themselves and their families. So I think it's an entitled way of looking at the elections process. I think we need to focus on other accessibility opportunities for people to vote. And, digital voting is something we should talk about.
Yeah, should people be able to vote online?
I think so, but we have to make sure that we're having a conversation about security first. Estonia does it. Alaska's about to implement it at the local level. And again, we have to make sure the security exists, but we can't start building that security until we start the conversation. I'm not saying we implement it tomorrow. We do it a good job in Nevada, but it's a conversation we should start having because every new registered voter is a digital native. And they look at a paper ballot and they're like, what is this?
Yeah. And we'll point out for people, too, people already vote online. It's our military and overseas voters, right? I forget what the platform is called for those folks, but yeah.
It's EASE. It's called the EASE system.
Yeah.
And then also to Nevadans who are homebound because of a disability, and then tribal members living on tribal lands.
Yeah. So it'd be expanding it to 3 million, possible
You can't
Nevadans,
scale it at the moment.
Right.
You can be very focused. And people should know there is a paper ballot that goes with every digital vote.
Is that using the blockchain to keep it secure, or what is the possible? That's probably a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's a very deep conversation. But yes, the security exists, the verification exists. There is a review process of verifying that the voter is and that's something we should talk about too, is biometrics and identifying if the ballot initiative does pass. I think a voter should be able to walk into a polling location like they do in an airport, have a picture taken, and they're registered and ready to go.
Yeah, no, you don't have to go dig up your birth certificate or
we also need mobile IDs
like
in Nevada.
Yeah.
That's something we should really have a policy conversation about in the 27 legislative session, is really having a mobile ID, especially as young people no longer carry a wallet.
Yeah.
And if we really want to talk about the security of it, we really need to give Nevadans an option to be secure.
Well, and I think back to the days of COVID where people had their, this might be a touchy topic for some people, but you could get your vaccine record, essentially your proof of COVID vaccine, as something that just showed up in your Apple Wallet on your phone. Would it be similar in that sense? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then the biometrics are behind it, right? You use biometrics every day when you go onto your phone, and it's locked, right? It's using those biometrics, and DMV does have that. It's just figuring out how do we utilize the data we have in a way that's making it easier for people.
Okay. The elections of the future. I think that's a podcast episode idea, because I could spend a whole nother hour talking about that, because that is fascinating, thinking about rethinking the ways that we have voted. It's not just filling out a bubble anymore.
No, and I think Andrew here, who's the county register at Washoe, is doing a really good job at figuring out how to build some of these efficiencies and build in technology to make the voter experience really strong. I'm really proud of Washoe County for stepping up and really doing a great job, and I'm excited to see how they perform in 26.
Yeah. Okay. Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar, thank you so much for coming into the studio. We always appreciate getting some of your time, and best of luck. We got, 2 elections this year.
No conversation about UNLV and the Wolfpack game on tomorrow?
You're right. Oh my gosh, that one's in Vegas, right?
It is.
You haven't followed as closely as I should. We are in
and the pack is strong.
Sports Studio B here, so I should be more aware of.
And just so you know, the UNLV head coach is an Arizona grad.
Oh, that's right.
And a former Arizona player. So as an ASU person, I don't know, it strengthens your support for the pack.
Yeah, no, I'm unwavering in my support of the Nevada Wolfpack, but that makes it even stronger. So we'll be watching that game closer. Are you going down in Vegas? Or?
I'll be actually up here for the Boys and Girls Club dinner. So
okay.
I'll miss it.
All right. Cisco Aguilar, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ben.
Alrighty, again, a special thank you to Cisco Aguilar and Brian Petrus, our associate producer who helped with this episode. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. If you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, anything at all, send me an email. I do want to hear from you. It's bjmargiott, MARGIOTT, at sbgtv.com, and put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a moment, please leave a rating and a review. That helps the podcast show up higher in searches so more people can discover Ballot Battleground Nevada. Thanks for listening.